infrastructure qualification mean? Where does it start? Where does it end? How can we put our arms around this particular question, right? So I'm going to try and attempt to answer that question in layers. I'm going to lay a layer on top of layer on top of layer. And in this case, I think it's a layer at the bottom of another layer at the bottom of another layer, where I start with the application at the top, and I end with the physical infrastructure at the bottom. So that way I can clearly walk you through the entire infrastructure, if you will. An application resides on the virtual infrastructure, the virtual infrastructure resides on the physical infrastructure, but all of these are connected, and ultimately when you're looking at it from a validation or a compliance or a qualification perspective, you need to look at this entire behemoth as a whole and try and split it up and try and understand how best to make sure that you've set it up in the right way and you've qualified it or validated it. So ultimately, what are we trying to do? We're trying to provide a virtual infrastructure that can support applications. By applications, I mean your ERP system, your document management system, your content management system, your CRM, whatever it is. Whatever it is that needs, that's automating a particular business process, that's your application, right? So what do we do in validation in the computer system validation world? We establish requirements for this particular application, right? And then we actually go about developing design specs, configuring the system, testing it, and so on and so forth. So in this particular scenario, the way I've set this up is if you develop requirements for the application, you focus your testing on the application only. So the application layer is really purely focused only on the application. It's dependent on the network. It's dependent on the virtual infrastructure. But the top layer where you focus on your application, you focus your testing also on your application. So I have the application, and I'm going to set it up. I have some requirements for my application, but my application actually requires something from where it resides. And where does it reside? It resides on virtual machines or servers, right? So my application needs certain things from my servers. So we need to develop requirements for different types of virtual machines or different types of servers. Maybe it's a Oracle database virtual machine. It's an Oracle database cluster virtual machine, a set of virtual machines. It's a Windows 2003 operating system, 32-bit that I need, with a CD-ROM, with a certain amount of memory, with a certain amount of hard drive space, and so on. Or it's a Windows 2008 server, which I need with certain specifications. So all of those are my requirements because that's what the application really needs me to have. It needs me to have a web server. It needs me to have a database server. It needs me to have an application server with certain requirements, and I need to build those out. So that's the virtual machines layer. So on the virtual machines layer, develop a common set of requirements. I mean, you may have about 6 to 7 types of virtual machines that you might need, out of which 4 are very commonly used. Build qualified VM virtual machine builds and templates for these scenarios and test them out and prove that they will work successfully. Now I have my application layer, which sits on top of my virtual machine layer, but the virtual machine layer truly needs certain things from my virtual infrastructure, right? So what does that mean? What is it requiring? Now my virtual machines are residing on one or more ESX boxes. They're controlled by VMware's vCenter console. Perhaps there's site recovery manager to do some site replication and disaster recovery in a completely new site. Perhaps there are high availability requirements. So if one particular physical box scraps out, my machine should seamlessly move to another available machine. Or if the resources for a particular machine are too intense, the virtual machine needs to be ported over to another machine, which is not a resource hog at the present moment. There's isolation, compatibility, security, and so on. So now you address that. So there are a common set of requirements that all virtual machines have from the virtual infrastructure layer, that is the bottom layer which really supports all of these virtual machines. So you develop those requirements and you go through the process of actually qualifying those requirements. Yes, you know what? I've tested high availability. I've physically shut down a box and proven that it works. I've tested SRM. I've simulated disaster recovery, and I can do this, with a few clicks of a mouse. And I brought this entire site down over Christmas shutdown, and lo and behold, it showed up on my secondary site, my disaster recovery site, 3,000 miles away. So those are the kind of testing that you'll do on the virtual infrastructure layer. Excuse me. Didn't realize that talking incessantly like that is kind of tickling my throat. Anyway, the virtual infrastructure layer also obviously depends on the physical infrastructure, meaning it obviously needs hardware. It most definitely needs a storage layer, meaning a storage area network, and so on. So what does my virtual infrastructure really need? It probably needs a database to manage all of the vCenter information. It needs Active Directory for security. So it needs storage. It needs hardware. So what are my requirements for the physical infrastructure layer? So what do I really need my physical infrastructure to do to support the virtual infrastructure, which in turn supports the virtual machines, which in turn support the validated applications, right? So you develop requirements for that and actually qualify against those requirements. So I need to have a SAN which can replicate across to my disaster recovery site. I need to be able to securely assign LUNs to a particular virtual machine, and there should be no cross-conflict, or there shouldn't be any compatibility or isolation issues, and things like that. So you'd actually go about developing those requirements and then test them out. Now, by splitting it up like this, you've really taken a rather unwieldy animal where you really didn't know where one layer began and where one layer ended, because an application is probably having single sign-on, so it depends on Active Directory. It's it needs to store information, so the information is stored in the SAN. It's on a virtual environment, and it depends on virtual machines and the virtual infrastructure. So when I'm truly validating that application, how do I know I've gone through the entire motions of the whole system? How do I make sure that the whole system is okay, or the whole system is compliant, or the whole system is validated, or the whole system is ready to go? This is how you would go about doing it. You actually split it up into individual layers and try and consolidate as far as possible the common activities like data replication or security or high availability and all of those things in those individual layers. So you don't have to keep testing these things out again for each new application. They've been provided for you as a service almost by the physical infrastructure, by the virtual infrastructure to the application. So you have, at any point in time, you can open the tap and you can use all of those resources, and they are always continuously maintained in a compliant state through proper change control and configuration management and deployment procedures and so on. So you have confidence that all of those common IT services or common IT infrastructure elements are provided to you, just like you would switch on or you plug in your machine onto the electricity socket and get the 110 volts and 60 hertz or whatever. So that's the way you should try and approach the problem. That way you kind of really simplify the overall the architecture.